Stay right there! What are you waiting for? Kill them! Kill them both! No, wait a minute! Is it money you're after? I'll give you as much as you want!
May the saints forgive you, because I won't.
I'm really excited to be joined by Gregory Peters, who is an author of quite renowned, I would say, especially because Tantra is at least one of the many subjects that we talk about on this show. And I'm going to let Gregory introduce himself and all his works. We're going to discuss, I think, primarily New Aeon Tantra, but I definitely, we're going to touch the Yoginis and multiple other topics. And of course, I'm joined by my co-host Solar Exile, who is also a co-host on the Grey Lodge Spaces, and he has his own, metamagical ideas percolating and working on that he's working on. So I'll let him say if he wants to say anything. But Gregory, please introduce yourself, and thank you so much, and welcome to Threshold Saints.
Hey, yeah, well, thank you for having me on. It's quite an honor. Yeah, I'm Gregory Peters, an author with Original Falcon Press. I think of myself as an explorer of consciousness. So for about 30 plus years, I've been exploring different aspects of consciousness through ritual, meditation, and studying the mystical and magical systems of Eastern and Western traditions. A lot of experience with Tantric Buddhism, Dzogchen, as well as Hindu Tantra, and Western magical systems. I've got a pretty long history with several occult traditions. And yeah, I've got a few books out. I'm not sure what else you'd want to hear in this.
Do you mind going into some of your background with like Western institutional magical orders, and then perhaps how you got into Tantra more specifically? And then how you came to maybe write this book, which is more syncretic, maybe more Typhonian, but it includes a lot of tantric elements. So I'll let you explain.
Yeah. So at a pretty early age, I explored a few different groups, I guess. Like at 18, I was looking at things like Amorc. There was a Crucian order, those kind of systems. But what happened was I met Phyllis Seckler pretty early on. Like I was about 20 years old. For those that don't know, Phyllis Seckler was very prominent in the Thelemic magical scene. So she was involved with the AA and OTO for a long time, and she started the College of Thelema, which is still ongoing to this day in a few different branches. And she was just an incredible teacher, a guru really, who took me under her wing at an early age in my path. And I ended up working with her for several decades until her death, becoming one of her senior students. And it was largely working with her and her guidance that I started to explore some of these other systems, because she was always very encouraging of looking at the bigger picture and not being caught up into just one particular reality tunnel, you guys say, one paradigm. But she was very open to exploring all the different systems of the world and whatnot. And through the writings of Kenneth Grant, I started learning about things such as Tantra, Sri Vidya, esoteric aspects of Buddhism, these different themes that come up in the Typhonian trilogies of Kenneth Grant. So I started following up on some of those themes. And, I guess you could say one thing led to another over the years. So I found a teacher in Tantric Buddhism and Dzogchen, Namkhai Norbu. I worked with him for quite a long time. I started working with Mike McGee and John Power, both of who are associated with particular streams of Hindu Tantra, the Adanath and the Uttarakala Sampradayas, which are these traditions that started in India but made their way over to the West by means of this one character, Dadaji Mahendranath, who was an Englishman who got inspired by Crowley, and Crowley told him, hey, go to India and find a guru. So he did. And so I got involved with those systems, a few others that sort of fed into it. A Kaula tantric guru that I met in Delhi. And yes, a few other things along the way. Freemasonry, I got involved with that. And it's interesting, from my perspective, because, I think syncretic really does put it well, in the sense that I really tend to look at these things from the perspective of consciousness being fundamental, not an emergent property of matter, but really the other way around. Consciousness is where it all begins, and it's the fundamental aspect of reality. And then these different traditions, these myths, religions, and so on, I see as this interplay, the magical display of consciousness, in a sense. And so where some people might find a conflict in, okay, let's look at Eastern and Western systems, or yogini magic, let's look at the yoginis from the context of a Western perspective. That seemed completely natural to me, because they're not particularly interested in man-made boundaries and that sort of thing, if that makes any sense. So a syncretic approach, kind of the first few centuries of the Mediterranean, are kind of, I probably would have been comfortable there with the melting pot of all these different cultures and systems sort of coming together. I like to work that way. I like to look at these different patterns and how they affect consciousness, and sort of how that magical display comes through. And a lot of it really is tied into each individual's perspective and what they're bringing to these energies. So, if you approach it from a very, say traditional or orthodox perspective, the energies were spawned in kind, if that makes sense. So I see that, how we interact and how our minds are prepared is sort of how these different energies and beings and whatnot present themselves to us.
So just by way of asking you to kind of elaborate on what you said there at the end, this is not a hostile question, because I've been engaged maybe for a tenth of the time that you had, right? You have 30 years under your belt. I have maybe 3 of working syncretically across East and West, right? But sort of from a naive perspective, right? Like, what do you think we gain by adopting this type of a syncretic approach of bringing these, trying to sort of integrate. I'm a like straight, almost radical Dzogchen guy. Maybe not
Hmm.
100%. That I do a little bit of deity and tantra stuff, but I'm like Dzogchen. That's my primary anchor point in the East. So we have these robust living sort of lineages. We have sort of piles of practice manuals, and we're very blessed, right? We have access to a pretty wide array of teachers, like just kind of distributed throughout the West and things like that. What do you think people can gain by sort of bringing a lot of those teachings and techniques and ideas still sort of under the heading of Thelema, or just a sort of Western framework in general, which maybe
Hmm.
doesn't necessarily have, like, at least in this kind of unbroken, the same way, like this sort of depth of connection to the past and a living tradition and accessibility in that way. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Um, yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, again, fundamentally, I think there's a sort of mystery about all of this, and rather than sort of hang on to definitions and labels that categorize and put this mystery into certain boxes or different types of analysis, I try to push for more ambiguity, more uncertainty, and trying to become almost comfortable with uncertainty, if that makes sense. So a syncretic approach, you have to be careful with it because, on the one hand, I mean, I do feel that with any of the traditional systems that you're looking at, I do think that it's important to get to a point with them where you are sort of stabilized in a particular tradition before you start bringing in other currents or other ways of looking at it. So, for example, in a Western sort of Golden Dawn traditional system, one would I would kind of encourage a person to go to, say, Adeptus Minor 5 = 6 before starting to work with other systems that may not be compatible, because that way, you're not confusing your interior symbol system, and you're becoming, you're building a good foundation in whatever particular system you happen to be looking at. If it's an Eastern system, then maybe working with a particular sadhana until that has gotten to maybe a point of stability or some sort of breakthrough, um, something along those lines. And that can take, upwards of 5, 6, 7 years or more, depending on the person. So it is a long process. And I think it's important to look at that as opposed to, kind of the approach where, okay, maybe I'll pick a little bit from this system that looks interesting, and maybe I'll take a little bit from something else and sort of mix and match. Because with that, you never really get to the depth of a particular way. And you may not get to your own depth, your own awakening that way. I mean, maybe some people do, but I kind of feel like you'd be bouncing around these different categories and symbol sets and maybe end up kind of confused in the end. So, I mean, to your actual question, what's the benefit of a syncretic approach? I think it really comes down to a person's mindset and temperament and sort of the I'd almost say, what is the karmic association that this person is connecting with? And because some people land in a system or a tradition, and that's it, right? They're set for life, and they're working with this particular ideology and this symbol set, and that's it. There's no turning back, no looking around. But I have always had more of deep enthusiasm for exploration, and not so much labels. Like even today, I'm reluctant to say, oh, I'm a tantric, or oh, I'm a thelemite. And and if you talk to someone who's in a traditional thelemic order, they'd look at me and say, what are you talking about? This person is, they're heterodox, right? They're not a Crowleyite or whatever. Or a Tibetan tantric, or they might think that I'm doing something that's against the Dharma by sort of recasting it or looking at it in a Western lens. So it's important, I think, to come to a point where you know who you are and what your what is it that you're looking for, or what is it that you're trying to accomplish. Is it just some sort of aesthetic thing? Do you want to be able to say, oh, I'm a tantric Buddhist, so I'm gonna dress a certain way and eat a certain way, and follow this sort of prescribed course? Or are you driving towards Gnosis? Are you, like in my case, I will look at any system, any tradition, any mythology, what have you, because my ultimate goal is knowledge, is Gnosis, is that direct experience, wherever it comes from, if that makes sense. So the syncretic thing is sort of, I think, some of the benefits are that no one system really has all the answers. Or looked at another way, maybe many systems have the answer, but they present it in different ways. And maybe it helps some people to look at different approaches and different symbol sets. I mean, even in a lot of tantric contexts, you will have several gurus, for example, not necessarily just one guru for life, but many of these teachers and siddhas and whatnot had several gurus, and that was encouraged, right, to actually travel around and learn from one for a while and then learn from another. And I think that's a healthy approach to remain, with open eyes, with eyes unclouded, to not take anything at face value, no matter what tradition, but to always sort of embrace the unknown and be willing to look with innocence, with fresh eyes, and with an open heart at whatever it is you're experiencing, in any organization or in any moment, really. That's kind of the core, to have that sense of wonder and openness in this practice.
I agree with you, Gregory, with everything you said. It might surprise you to hear that, but I'm not heterodox per se, but I'm trying to approach frameworks in an open-minded way and look at the parallels, much like you do, at the sort of, if there's a primordial system, maybe, because obviously I'm Buddhist, so we do think that there is a primordial truth, but it's surrounded perhaps by the relative. But also non-dual gnosis, of course. Like it was a great phrase that you said, because that is like Manjushri, like the Bodhisattva Manjushri. His name can be translated to non-dual gnosis, and he is the Bodhisattva of non-dual gnosis. That's why he holds the flaming wisdom sword. So to cut away the ignorance of duality. So
Yeah.
I agree, and you do talk a lot about non-duality. Now, is Advaita and like Buddhist, the sort of Nagarjunian non-duality exactly the same? No, but it is similar. So
that's right.
Right. So there's a language in common that I think people can access, and I do think that the Indian tantric system is probably a little more friendly to people coming from a ceremonial magic background. Now, I don't have a ceremonial magic background, so that might be just completely off base, but from my own experience with the Mahavidyas I know you extensively talked about Nepal and sort of your experiences with Kaula and Kali maybe herself. And of course, you brought up the idea of the Yoginis and what their preoccupation with. And in Tibetan, we obviously call them Narokachari, so the sky dancers or the sky witches. And so, yeah, they're not located necessarily in place, but they are kind of located specifically in Nepal. So I wanted to ask you, because this is a very important place for me also. I didn't necessarily have your experience when I was there, but going to the Vajrayogini shrines and the Chinnamastaka, the famous shrine in Nepal. Now there's also Ragaraja in India, but in Assam, it's not as
Yeah.
famous, obviously, as Kamakhya, but it is a very important temple. And, like Naropa, Nagarjuna, even Padmasambhava were said to pass through Kamakhya and probably the like greater tantric complex of like Eastern India. So I want to ask you about your experiences, if you don't mind sharing, in Nepal and sort of how you came into higher Vidya or higher knowledge.
Hmm. Nepal was, yeah, truly a magical place. I had gone there with the intent of going for a trek. So, and that was a large part of it, going to Everest Base Camp. And it was interesting because over the process of that, you're doing a lot of, every day you're doing hiking, right? And the altitude is increasing as you go. And, the diet was different. I was eating a lot less and, just putting my physical body under so many different conditions that I was not used to whatsoever. So, because I went there with no training or anything. I'm just like, oh, I'm going to go to Everest Base Camp. This will be cool. So one technique that I took upon myself while I was there doing the trekking was I would just be reciting mantra, for sometimes hours at a time. So the only sound, you're in the middle of nature, and the only sound is, your footsteps crunching, your breathing, and then this internal mantra going on and on. And it's an incredible way to get that focus, that fine, directed awareness that is like it is like a diamond, right? Like a thunderbolt at times, the way it just builds up the adamantine body in consciousness. So as I'm doing this, it was also interesting because in Nepal, as you know, right down lower in the cities, it tends to be more, I'd say predominantly Hindu, like in Kathmandu, but then there's also a lot of Buddhism there, and it mixes together so beautifully. Then as there'll be shrines with like Buddhas and Hindu tantric deities all blended together. But then as you come up into the mountains, it becomes more the Sherpas, right, in the villages and whatnot, and decidedly Buddhist at that point. Now, I didn't encounter a lot of tantric Buddhism while I was there, or at least the people that I would speak to up in the hills didn't really make these distinctions. They were just doing, their practice, their meditation, or their, different pujas and whatnot. They didn't necessarily say, oh, well, this is tantric and this is something else. But the point being that as I started in Kathmandu, I was maybe doing a Hindu mantra, for example, a Hindu tantric mantra. And then, a few days later, as I'm higher up in altitude and I'm in the Sherpa villages, I was doing, maybe, just as an example, Vajrasattva, right? Purification mantra or something, as I'm trying to get through and continue to breathe at altitude. So I
I'm
was
just going to interrupt you
intrigued.
there, Gregory. I just want to say that, like, I often speak about this in Yandro practice and Vajrasattva and how important it is, how fundamental it is. And
Yeah.
Nepal is like a Kathmandu, excuse me, is shaped like a mandala. If you look at the
Yes.
old city Kathmandu, like obviously you know this, but like around Bodhinath, they have the gates for the matrikas. They have a Hanuman Bhairava, so he's like a syncretic.
Mm.
He's more of a Bhairava. He's like more of a Buddhist deity, and then they have the Mahakalas, and then the Ashta Bhairavas, and then of course in the valley they have the four Varahis that surround the kingdom. So just like any mandala, really, it's like a physical
Yeah.
mandala. So it's a kind of the Vajrasattva is just a perfect hermeneutic, maybe you could say, to carry yourself through all the different stages and layers of the mandala and all the deities that you might encounter.
Yeah, that is a fantastic way to look at it. Um, yeah, because yeah, I was gonna bring up how Sri Yantra, for example, is talked about being encoded in Nepal in the city. But I mean, obviously, multiple different mandalas are sort of embedded on the structure of this geography, and it's incredible because I mean, in a way, that's a living syncretism right there. And as you're walking through it, you're experiencing all of these different energies, and for people like us that are open to these different energies, interesting things can happen. um, yeah, and that's kind of what happened to me as I was getting higher and higher up in the mountains and focusing on the mantras. Um, and my guide would occasionally talk about Chomalungma, the goddess of Everest. Um, so I was getting into that zone and just opening up to those types of energies as I was going through this. And I wouldn't say I was not prepped for coming into contact with something, because obviously I'd had years before this of working with different systems, mostly the Western systems, um, and also some tantric. But yeah, it was sort of it was I kind of think of it as the perfect storm, or the confluence of all these energies that just sort of came together for me at the right time and the right place, I would say. And the results, I mean, even I don't know, even when I think about it now, I get chills and kind of shaky just thinking about you know the touch of the goddess of Devi in that
Well,
place.
sorry, Gregory, I didn't mean to interrupt you. But no, I think what you're saying is very profound in the sense that, um, like the yoginis choose who they choose, like they are very
Mm,
agential, you could say, and they appear when they want to appear, and whenever obviously we speak of them on recording or not in real life as well, that means they're around. Well, at least that's how a Buddhist would explain it. And I
mm,
think that a lot of tantric resolutions, like how the Indian tantric texts and the Buddhist tantric texts, obviously Buddhism sees itself as predating Indian tantra, and Nuwari tantra also contains the matrika sort of sadhana still. So
mm.
it's all sort of like, at least that's how they understand it. Whether like we believe it or not, or whether I believe it or not, doesn't really matter. It just is, that's how they view themselves. And so I think that it's a very important place for sort of the rectification of Tantra, like bringing it out
Mm.
of the sort of like Tibetans think of themselves as like the ancient Tibetans were just demon worshippers in their view, which is probably true. But the Nuwaris sort of like innovated sort of syncretism between all the different kinds of tantras. Obviously, Kali Kola is more popular in Kashmir, which also had a
Yeah.
very significant Tibetan presence and Tibetan kingdom. But I don't know. I'm sure you know this, but the Sri Vidya Tantras, the South Indian, particularly the ones that still preserve a lot of the Choseth Yogini practices,
Mm.
they're very similar, very, very similar to the Vajra Yogini mandalas and the Bardo
Yeah.
Dakinis and all of that. So in a way, it is kind of reconciled in Nuwari Tantra. And it's unfortunate that more people don't practice or know about it, and it's not really like a um, living school in the West, at least.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, from what I understand, there's still so much that has not even been translated from a lot of that material. So you can only imagine what a gold mine there must be in some of these archives in Nepal.
Absolutely. I want to redirect because you've talked about the sort of fundamentals of mantra and
Mm,
also meditation, which I think is sort of like, for me, mantra and meditation, those are the, we'll call it the two M's that are really important for me and like my sadhanas and my practices. But um,
mm.
the fundamental sort of position of meditation, if you don't mind saying something about that, because I really think that people underestimate its importance, and maybe even your transition away from ritual magic into more simplified, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but a more simplified or more streamlined practice with mala and meditation as your core.
Yeah. Um, Meditation was what I first started with. I mean, going all the way back to, even preteen, I guess. I started experimenting with meditation. So for me, it's always been pretty fundamental and comfortable to sit with that, to sit with that. Um, so when I started with, Western ceremonial magic, one thing that I noticed that was not really present was that contemplative aspect and that meditative foundation with ritual magic. Now that would come later with reading Crowley and Kenneth Grant and whatnot, where Crowley in particular would emphasize, we have Liber E and Liber O, the two foundations of yoga and magic, right? Where he would emphasize this meditative aspect. But still, I found a lot of Western magicians just did not really want to emphasize that aspect of it. It's more exciting to do ritual and to wear the robes and do all the motions and whatnot. Um, and yeah, that's Kriya, right? That's very energetic, powerful stuff. But what I have certainly found is that having that open, spacious awareness, that foundation of a meditative practice, gives space for all of this energy, this kriya, to to have a ground to explore, to play, to dance in. I mean, in the Hindu tantras in particular, right? We talk about this idea of how the goddess loves play, Leela. She loves to play and dance, and is even kind of a trickster in a lot of ways. But the core idea is, this with, if we're looking at Shiva Shakti, for example, Shiva consciousness is this open, expansive ground of being, and then Shakti um, is this power and this radiance that plays in that open field. So the two are continuously intertwined, and that's really how I see meditation and ritual working with each other. Now, mantra, of course, sort of takes all of these aspects. You've got body, speech, and mind when you're working with mantra in this meditative sort of framework. And obviously one bija mantra, for example, can encode like the entire plethora of the Devi and her retinue of yoginis. Or yeah, I just blanked out on that one thinking about it, but but you know what I mean? It's like it's I mean, just on one level, yeah, obviously concentration is good. Concentration is going to help with any kind of magic, any aspect of your life. So sure, just on one very simple level, meditation and mantra is going to help you with that, right? But there's so much more. It's sort of like, saying how the yoga trend these days with hatha yoga is basically just a physical exercise. Well, okay, there's that, but it's a lot deeper than that, right? Um, so many more layers and so much more depth to these concepts. And you do see the parallel between mantra and in Western magic, the idea of, the universe was created by vibration with the word. I mean, you even see that in things like the Bible, for example, right? So it is one of those meeting points between East and West where sound, vibration, and sort of this encoding of consciousness as light and how it's embedded in every aspect of reality, of experience, is all right there. And meditation and mantra are kind of the way to sit in the center of that, I guess you could say, and experience it real time. Yeah, I mean, ritual practices are a good balance to that, whether they're Eastern or Western, right? Because as you're doing the ritual motions or reciting an incantation and so on, you're also, if you're doing it from the position of awareness, you're experiencing this magical display and, highlighting these different aspects of this wave form of reality that you're basically experiencing through these different actions. Taken to the extreme, right? That could be, I mean, you might be performing a ritual, you might be doing the dishes. I mean, a point does come where the difference is very subtle, isn't it? And it really comes down more to awareness and intent, I would say. I kind of rambled on a bit there.
No, it was wonderful. Yeah. Yeah, no, one of the things I really liked about your book was again, you sort of emphasize these fundamentals. Because one of the things, so in thinking about, I also do not have a ritual magic background, right? Where anyone under the age of
Okay.
40, I feel like we all have chaos magic backgrounds instead of, like hermetic ceremonial backgrounds.
Sure.
But in trying to sort of like understand, at least our heritage and the Western occult traditions and things like that, it seems pretty clear that definitely at one time the ritual magician is trying to leverage this kind of complex web of association, this sort of these networks, these scaffolds of meaning, right? Everything from their implements, the elemental associations, directions, like, divine names and all of these things. They're very clearly trying to, I mean, among other things, like allow the ceremonial practitioner to kind of enter into a magical sort of state of of altered awareness. They might describe it differently as like a flow state, of conscious experience that's conducive to magical working, right?
Yeah.
That seems very clear, and it's something that you accomplish over time, both with the learning that you're doing to put sort of like all these sort of pieces together theoretically, but also you're rehearsing your gestures, your procedures, building it up. So part of your brain, it's busy, but it's sort of on autopilot, and it allows that sort of magical consciousness to sort of be able to come about in the practice. But what ends up and it's clear that was sort of working at one time, as well as there was this sort of emphasis on the fundamentals of meditation, as you said, like in Crowley and in Grant, right? This is hammered home again and again. But as these things have kind of like degraded in transmission, and been diffused, especially without like the direct like lineage transmission of joining actual orders and things like that, it's like a lot of the emphasis on the fundamentals is lost, and we have instead this kind of like the sort of ruined version of the sort of abandoned, the empty scaffold, right? Where like none of these things necessarily, like it, you read a book, you haven't put in the repetitions, you're trying to go through these empty motions, right? And you're not sure, nothing seems to be working, you're just kind of like play acting the thing without really understanding that it's really this sort of like mode of awareness, or again, I'm struggling because we're straddling sort of Eastern and Western vocabularies here, but it's the
Sure.
consciousness, it's the mind that really allows the thing to happen, right? And that doesn't seem to be something that's like at the foreground of a lot of, the popular books that you find yourself reading on like Western esoteric like practice, right? It's all gestures, it's all ritual, it's all the accoutrements of that, without the bare bones of like, okay, we're going to train, we're going to stabilize, we're going to do shamatha vipassana, right? And then once we're able to actually like move around in trekcho or whatever, like however you want to say that, right? But like once we're able to actually do visualizations in this non-dual state, now we're cooking with gas, right? Because for me, like
Yeah.
that's where the actual magic happens, right? And I know when something is going to work almost ahead of time, because it's, can I actually, stabilize this state, yes or no, and if the answer is no, well then it's probably still worth doing as a practice, as an attempt, but it's going to be kind of bullshit, you know but I learned that through experience and through my engagement in like Dzogchen. I didn't,
Yeah.
no one told me that in the Western context, and that's a shame. I wasted a lot of time, I guess.
Mm, yeah, that's a good point. I mean, that's definitely an issue, especially, I don't know, the last several years, I guess. I mean, there's certainly a plethora of books and online courses and, little feeds on different social media channels and stuff, YouTube. Um, probably 100,000 different exposés on doing the banishing ritual of the pentagram or something. Um, but yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, without having kind of that framework, that superstructure, and putting the discipline into actually building up these different forms, um, it's going to be hard to tap in, which is probably also why there's such a so many different books and channels and everything out there right now, because I think in a lot of ways a lot of the people are orphaned. They're stuck in the searcher phase, the seeker phase, without being able to get into the depth maybe. um I mean, there are still orders out there, right? And there is such a thing as one-on-one instruction and mentoring and that sort of thing, which, be it east or west, I think is can be very valuable in order to sort of navigate some of this stuff. I mean, if you look at like Crowley's AA system, the original idea was to take these different systems, these philosophies from yoga, from ceremonial magic, and so on, bring them together. But you weren't just like handed a book and said, okay, go off and do this. There was interaction, there was actual training with another person, someone who presumably had already gone along at least a step ahead of you, if not all the way, at least one step ahead, so that they could, you know, give you things like the oral tradition, which you're not going to get in a book necessarily. I mean, there's one thing I definitely learned working with Phyllis and also working, in Dzogchen, is that, this mystique, I think, that Westerners put around the idea of the guru figure is an interesting one, because to a lot of Westerners in particular, it's off-putting, right? It's a big barrier. Um, especially if you look at say Thelemic magicians, they're like, "Oh no, I'm not going to bend my knee to anyone. I don't need a guru and all this stuff." But that's be that's largely because of this mystique that's built up around the idea. But if you just step back a little and look at, okay, what's happening here? It's a relationship with someone. And we have so many relationships where, I mean, our entire existence is in interrelationship with every aspect of reality, in a sense, right? and being able to be in the presence of someone that is maybe a few steps ahead of you, or maybe an enlightened being, or whatever we want to call it, does have an effect on you. You know, whether they're, you know, you're just, again, just washing the dishes together, or if you're sitting and having a deep philosophical conversation, or what have you. There's something about that exchange of energy that really speeds this work up, I think, and really helps to set you on the right track, I guess, is how I might put it.
Thank you for that, Gregory. I wonder if we could just.
I think I may have lost you guys again.
Can you hear me?
No, I can hear you fine.
Okay,
I
good.
can hear you. Yeah.
I keep hearing a buzzing in my ear pods. I'm like, what's happening here? But yeah,
We should have mentioned the Yoginis, like you said, but
I think like you can get pretty far with books and with self-initiation, and I think that depends a lot on, you know, a person's experience that they've already had, or maybe, you know, if you know, depending on how you want to look at it, right? Maybe past life experience or something like along those lines, or some other aspect. You know, everyone is so unique and individual in that sense that I really don't think there's just one answer. But we do have, just over the years and decades and centuries, really, we do have at least some idea of like, okay, well, you know, there's something in this system and working in a certain way that seems to have an effect that, you know, when I look at it, I'm like, oh, okay, wow, yeah, that looks like something that I would want to aspire to, or experience. And that's where interacting with other people really comes into play. I mean, that's such an essential aspect of it. But at the same time, there's a lot of solitary workers, isn't there? I mean, and I guess it goes through phases as well. But it really, you know, especially in the beginning stages and starting out, and even, you know, the first several years, it's helpful, I think, to have some kind of guidance instead of just jumping around from book to book, or, you know, channel to channel.
For the record, I think
pieces.
this is something that New Aeon Tantra really captures well in the chapter on Guru Yoga, right? And sort of recognizing like the nature of mind, nature of, you know, Dharmakaya as being, you know, in a sense, like, you know, you come to understand that, you know, you and the guru have like the same nature, and, you know, again, framing this in terms of the holy guardian angel, etc., right? But that's not to say that we're completely discounting exactly what we're talking about, right? Like the sort of outer guru, like contact with lineage, tradition, etc., right?
Yeah.
Because like this is a complicated, like, nuanced thing, right? You don't just, you know, there's a reason that, you know, in like orthodox, like Buddhist instruction, right? They don't, you know, dump this information. Oh yeah, it's the inner guru. Okay, go to the mountain, see ya, you know, and that's it,
Right.
right? There's right. So yeah, just like being, you know, letting people in on the secret, if you will. It's not, obviously it's not a secret at all, but, you know, being able to recognize nature of mind, you know, the all creating sovereign, etc., but with that in a way that doesn't encourage risky sort of solipsistic ideation or practice, you know. It can be tricky,
Absolutely.
especially communicating that to a non-dharmic audience, you know.
Yeah. I mean, you see that a lot in Western systems, and certainly in Thelema. Because if you look at, you know, the purely, I mean, just look at Crowley's writing, I guess, you know, forget Kenneth Grant for the moment, but just sort of looking at the classic Crowleyan teachings, it can easily be misinterpreted, right? And a person can just very quickly fall into this idea of well, not idea, but they can experience ego aggrandizement. I am God, there is no one else, or, you know, we're all gods. And some really atrocious behavior can come out of that unless a person has actually gone through the training that Crowley himself, indicated is necessary in order to have that sort of divine royalty, or, that sort of way of looking at yourself and the universe. It's not enough to just say, okay, this is my will, and if you don't like my will, then get the hell out of my way. there's a lot of subtlety and a lot of nuance in it that is largely missed, which I think was part of my drive to things like Kenneth Grant and ultimately writing New Aeon Tantra, was to sort of break open the code of Thelema in that context, and sort of show that, well, there's a lot of history here and a lot of tradition that actually fed into this, and there are parallels, and there are cognate ideas that are much older, that are clearly part of this same sort of divine impulse, this stream, but wearing different clothes, you might say. This coat of many colors idea. One of the names of the goddess is Svechakarini, right? She who works by her own will, self-arising, this sort of thing. And that can be lost if you're only reading Crowley, I guess, which Crowley himself did not want you to do. But again, with sort of the modern versions of it, a lot of people just tend to read Crowley, and maybe they'll branch out and read some Nietzsche or something. But there's you need to go a lot deeper with Thelema and with Crowley to sort of get a bigger picture, I think. I've always appreciated looking at it a little deeper, but I look at it so deeply and so differently that, again, a lot of the Orthodox Crowleyites would not even consider me a Thelemite, and that's okay. Again, I'm not really into the labels.
I agree with that, Gregory. It's important to be post-conceptual. That's a true tie. I know you said you didn't necessarily identify as a tantrika, but I think it's an important symbol of a tantrika is that you can be post-conceptual in your idea of labels and like sort of eschew them or discard them.
I can't hear anything.
Can't hear anything from Jin. Can you hear anything from me?
Oh, I can hear you. Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's Jin who was asking the question. We really need to be able to hear from him. Well, we'll see. Well, hopefully he can reconnect, because his disconnecting, I think, is what split you and I off from one another. So hopefully hopefully we can get back and not have to do this. StreamYard is usually pretty consistent. I don't know why it's kind of volatile today. I guess everyone's having a difficult evening.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, there's a lot of solar activity. Maybe that's doing something.
Yeah. So, yeah, this is what we get for not taking the astrological side of things seriously enough, I guess.
Exactly. I know Jin originally wanted to.
I can hear both of you very well. Can you hear me?
I can hear Jin. Are you
okay?
Are we all good?
Yeah. Huh. Gregory?
Okay.
I see the icon moving.
Okay, Gregory, can you hear me now?
Hey. Yeah, there you are.
Okay, great. Awesome. I think you said the perfect word, maybe, the self-arising. So this is something that I've tried to discuss in relation. Obviously I said I'm not a Kali Kola person, but I'm more of a Lalita Tripura Sundari person, we'll say. At least the Buddhist equivalent, which of course there is Kurkula. So it's really important for the nature of the yoginis or dakinis, depending on how you classify them, for them to be self-arising, because that is sort of how they are in the world. So I thought that it was a great point, because they do exist in our fire of consciousness, but perhaps also externally are their own beings. So I don't know. There is something interesting about them and their trickster, playful nature, and how they come in and come out to sort of be the guru in a way. And I think that was, I don't want to speak for you, Gregory, but I think that was kind of your experience also with a different goddess, but perhaps also the same, depending on how you think of it, of course. But if you want to speak on that a little bit, like Kali and sort of how you came to bring the tantric ideas into this Typhonian sort of framework, and like what was your inspiration, and was it a like revelation? Was it, I've heard you discuss dream yoga on a different show, and how that was important to your writing process, like if you don't mind getting into that a little bit, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah. Well, process-wise, through just the years of meditation and working with Dzogchen, it sort of, I mean, I would say naturally led to dream yoga and working with those types of techniques. And that really has opened up just the whole magical experience. And in countless ways, really, to the point where, I mean, in a lot of ways, just the experience of awareness and sort of that difference between waking consciousness and sleep consciousness, and then deep sleep, and so on and so on. Where are those different levels or categories, and are they even, they're more fluid than we typically would believe in, from the sort of materialistic viewpoint. So I guess with that in mind, I mean, I've held a place in my heart for the goddess Kali, but her many forms. I mean, Kali is the one probably most dear to me in a lot of ways, but I also see this divine feminine throughout manifestation, throughout consciousness. I mean, really, consciousness itself often presents a divine feminine aspect to it, and we see that throughout history and throughout cultures, right? So I mean, we have these I mean, if you go back to, I don't know, the ancient Egyptians, this idea of the primordial chaos, this great sea of darkness, from which the mound rises, and right there we're seeing this sort of polarity between consciousness at a fundamental level, and then the single still point of maybe the individual awareness. And we see that reflected again and again throughout these different traditions, this sort of interplay. So what's that have to do with Kali? Well, Kali is consciousness. She is the great, in the womb matrix of reality itself. She is outside of time, because time manifests because of her presence, or however you want to look at it. I mean, the world looked at from a certain perspective, samsara is a cremation ground. It's a cremation ground to the goddess, and our very existence, our lives, are ritual, performances and ablutions to her. Walking around her temple, you can look at it. So again, it goes back to this idea of the living mandala of experience itself, and the different frameworks that might be incorporated there, or your perspectives. For me, it happened to be the goddess in this form as Kali. And looking back, there were certainly indicators that she was brewing in consciousness in one way or another. I mean, Kenneth Grant does talk about her, and he equates her with all of these different aspects, the void, shunyata, and whatnot, but also ideas like the Ein Sof, the Ein, nothingness, and Nuit, again, this idea of zero, nothingness, but from that nothingness is everything. All of manifest reality, everything that you experience is embodied, is the energy of the goddess in one aspect or another. It's an interesting thing, isn't it? Because consciousness itself, I have found, has this compassionate quality to it, and this feminine quality to it, in the way that it presents itself, I guess is how you could say it. I mean, if you even look at something like the Heart Sutra, Prajnaparamita, I mean, she's considered as a goddess, right? Prajnaparamita is a goddess, with these aspects of just all embodying consciousness, awareness, both the blazing fire and the nothingness of the abyss, and it's all sort of entangled and manifesting continuously and dissolving and so on. So while I tend to resonate with the name Kali for different reasons, I also recognize that even that is yet another veil for something that's much deeper, and even giving these qualities to this void, or whatever you want to call it, as compassionate, or bodhicitta, manifesting out of this nothingness. I don't know. I think, is it our human minds that say, oh well, that's sort of the divine feminine, or is it some actual quality of the void? I mean, that's a mystery, I think. Certainly a mystery to me at this stage, and something that I try to wholeheartedly embrace, because I don't know, I'm in awe of it, in wonder of this aspect.
Well, that's a good place to be, Gregory, is probably in awe and wonder. Obviously, that's part of the Marga, specifically for Kali, but not just her, also for the other Virasic goddesses, of which there are a few, at least. And I loved your point about Pranaparamita, because this is something that a lot of people don't know, is that, yes, the Journey to the West story, sorry, Solar, I'm going to bring this up, but the Journey to the West story is the story of the Pranaparamita, is the collection of the goddess texts, but it's not necessarily goddess texts. It's like you said, it can be the Heart Sutra, it can be the Diamond Sutra, it can be various other sutras like that are obviously in the Pranaparamita classification. And she is embodied in a particular goddess. She's not necessarily a Dakini, but the Chandika, obviously this has a Indian tantric and a Tibetan Buddhist parallel. But yeah, Jinti, as we'd say in Chinese, but Chandika, Bodhisattva is basically the sort of the activity form, or the wrathful form, or she's not really wrathful, she's actually semi-blissful, is how they would classify it in art. But she is the sort of embodiment of the text. And then, but in that way, she's the word, but then the word is also empty, because that's what the divine feminine is in a Buddhist way, is that, or the Dakinis, or the goddesses, or the bodhisattvas, is that they are fundamentally empty, just like the bijas. So, and obviously you know this, Gregory, but we would make them self-combust, the bijas at the end of our sadhanas.
Yes.
So I wanted to ask you, though, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to go on about Pranaparamita, but I wanted to ask you, do you consider Kali and Nuit to be relative degrees of each other? Instead of asking if they're the same one-to-one, which I don't think you think, I don't know, but like, are they related, and in how, if you can qualify that?
Yeah, I think and well, yeah, Kali and Nuit, but I would expand this even to say that, the goddess, she loves to play and she loves to wear different forms, you might say. So depending on the people or the environment that she is working with or who are experiencing her, that is the presentation that she takes on. Um, we see this over and over again. It's actually endlessly fascinating to me. So, for example, the Marian apparitions that have occurred throughout the world. Um, like Zaitun, Egypt, for example. I'm blanking on the date, but it was like the 70s or something like that. This radiant vision appearing in Coptic Egypt of the of Mary with an ethereal dove over her head and crown of stars and whatnot in Coptic Egypt. So you're in this area that has this rich magical history and this long Egyptian magical history, and obviously the melting pot, the Mediterranean from the first few centuries, Common Era, etc., etc. But in Coptic Egypt, this, ostensibly Christian area, she appeared in this Marian form. Then you fast forward to, say more contemporary times and the UFO phenomenon, right? There's this presence that has been appearing that people are calling the lady. Chris Bledsoe writes about this and a few others. And the lady seems to have attributes that are similar to, say, the Egyptian Hathor, or some say Isis, and so on. But whatever the nature of that phenomenon, it seems to me that again we're talking about this fundamental, this cosmic aspect of the divine void, the divine feminine, and it's presenting itself in a way that the consciousness of the people experiencing it can comprehend, or at least maybe latch on to. I mean, I don't think anyone understands it, obviously, but it's appearing in symbol sets that resonate with the person's consciousness, which is all kind of a roundabout way of saying that, yeah, I do think Kali and Nuit do share a lot of qualities, in particular the void, that nothingness, the quality of embodying everything, and within their body, are these pinpoint individual points, these stars, or these aspects of consciousness that radiate outwards. And then you also see that with Babalon, for example, in the thelemic systems, Babalon being sort of, yet again, a different octave, a different outfit on the divine feminine.
I wanted to jump in just two things. So one, I think, again, this was a really wonderful presentation of these ideas, right? It's we can sort of acknowledge that the symbols, the sort of like the mythos, the way these concepts are going to appear is sort of like contingent on karmic conditions of individuals, of peoples, cultures, historical contexts, right? But the goal isn't to sort of to reify and become fixated on like direct equivocations or things like that, right? Because like what really matters is ultimately having the right sort of like foundation, the right grammar, the right sort of theory of mind that allows us to work with whatever sort of like symbol set or like mythic framework we feel magnetized to, depending on the particularities, the contingencies of our karmic conditions, right? So as long as we have like the toolkit right and the sort of the outlook right, we can engage productively with a pretty wide like array of sort of appearances, sort of facets of this
Hmm.
primordial phenomenon that is at a fundamental level beyond any sort of concept or description or things like that, right? I did want to ask this. I'm sorry for such like a mundane question, but it was just something that came up as you were describing Babalon specifically in New Aeon Tantra. I
Yeah.
just so and again, I know I just disclaimed direct equivocation here, but so when you were describing Babylon, and you referred to Babylon as primordial consciousness. I'm sorry, I don't remember the page number, otherwise I'd reference it offhand. But did you mean Rigpa there, or do you mean Alaya Vijnana, like substrate consciousness, right? Like yeah, I was just
Hmm.
kind of curious, like which you were referring to, because based on the description, yeah, it could have kind of gone both ways. Sorry for such a
Sure.
sort of particular thing.
No, that's a good question. And I'm not sure I really differentiated in that context so much because she is the base. So yeah, there is this Alaya aspect of again the depth, right? Sort of going back to like the, I don't know, the Sumerian idea or something of the Abzu, this depth, or the Jungian subconscious and collective unconscious and whatnot. So there's that aspect, but there's also just the in working with her, there's the spontaneous, arising of awareness and that perception of, oh, this is happening, this experience is interacting. So and it is fundamentally empty, isn't it, because of the this mysterious nature of it. So I mean, I do think in a lot of ways you could look at her either way, and I think that will probably infuriate people that are studying, in particular the Eastern systems. But I, I'm not really going to differentiate her so much in that sense because she and really the divine feminine can present all of these aspects. She is fundamental to all of these different experiences and ways of sort of, chopping up experience and analyzing it. Like there's like what 20 something different levels of samadhi, for example, but when you get down to the core, we're talking about that non-dual experience, consciousness itself. And I think, whether we want to call that the ground of being or the primordial arising of awareness or what have you, I think those qualities and this qualityless mystery, if that's kind of a mouthful, but it's kind of, we're talking around the center of something that is inexpressible and trying to present it in a way that our minds can understand, I guess, if that makes sense. I'm kind of rambling.
No, totally. I'm also so glad you answered the question that way, not just in like again, because that sort of our underlying conceptual frameworks kind of mesh there, but
Sure.
also that sort of matches, at least as little as I understand it, this sort of like sort of fickle and complex nature of Babylon,
Hmm.
Babylon, the ever virgin, but also the harlot, and all it, just like she's going to defy like whichever sort of box you want to put her in. She's going to break right out of that and straddle it anyway. So,
Absolutely. Yeah. And you see that sort of behavior, that sort of dance of the energy with the yoginis, with, different aspects of the goddess. Because again, it's this playful kind of, the energy is so fluid and just constantly changing forms. And once you think you've grasped her, then oops, it's she turns into something else. You catch glimpses out of the corner of your eye and so on. Um, yeah, very much so. And then I think that when she does take on these different forms, so for example, Babalon, even then, it's so dynamic and not shifting, but yeah, I think just dynamic. The energy that we're talking about is, if you're inside the fishbowl and you are the fishbowl, then who's experiencing who, right? I mean, what's the actual interplay here? And that sort of dance, that Leela, is kind of where she's at. And I know in like the Thelemic communities, there's been a trend for her to present as, okay, this very sexual and kind of I don't know, just very, very sexual and powerful energy, and certainly that's an aspect of it. But it's also interesting to look at her as, for example, the Gnostic Sophia, like thunder, perfect mind, and
Sorry, Gregory, she's definitely that, in my opinion, also. Like,
Yeah.
I agree with you. You might fight me because I think that I find Babylon to be more equivalent to Vajrayogini. I know we said we weren't going to do direct one-to-ones, but that's just my how I appraise it. I'm not saying that that's fixed.
That's beautiful. Yeah.
That's how I feel. And I think I can reconcile what both of you are saying very easily. In the Indian Tantras, you obviously Chinamastika or Vajrayogini, both the same in degrees. In the Indian Tantras, she's obviously a Buddhist goddess who's been imported into Indian Tantra according to like Elizabeth English and all the literature around her, and it does seem to bear out. But she in the Indian Tantra, she's not post-Gnosic until much later in the Marga. So when you approach her as like maybe a Virasic Upasaka at the 4th level, she still is aggregated, like what Solar was asking. Like she still is composed of like those mind aggregates. At least that's how you would generate her. But then once you accomplish that sort of outer presentation, then she becomes post-Gnosic, post-conceptual, she's neither nor. She's not the whore and she's not the virgin. She's something else, secret third thing. So anyways, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. It just is a very exciting topic for me.
That's beautiful. Yeah, well said. I love that. Yeah. With Kali, she's considered a black goddess, right? A dark, fearsome, terrifying entity. And sure, on some level, that's very true. That's how she presents. But there is also this inner core that you come to experience where, she is just radiant golden light at one level and pure love, pure awakening. And then there's, level beyond that and so on. It's probably largely a function of, how our brains can take in this kind of information.
I love that you said golden because this ties into our conversation on Pranaparamita, that she's depicted as either white or golden. And in the higher Vajrayogini sadhanas, like in the Anutara Yoga Yogini Tantras, she becomes golden. Like the red is actually a secret code. Even in Chinnamastika's sort of outer presentation in Indian iconography, you can see this is true because sometimes she is paired with, they're called Varnini and Dakini in the sort of more Shabar folk village tantras. But if you really understand, she can also be considered, her companions can also be Tara and not Buddhist Tara per se, but Smashan Tara and Kali. So it's like the black and the green with the red, who is actually secretly post-Gnosic, so she's really gold or white, depending. But I find that really interesting that you said that, Gregory. And I don't know if you would agree with this, but I've long considered Tara, Umatara, to be at least in degrees related to Isis, like as the sort of primordial star goddess. I don't know how you feel about that. You can tell me.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. I mean, there was a time, right, when Isis was the predominant goddess, I mean, throughout the ancient world, and her influence in a lot of ways continues on through the different traditions and streams. Um, I mean, I don't talk about that quite as much, at least not yet. But it's interesting that you tapped into that, because yeah, I very much would see that connection.
I mean, it just it makes sense. She's the first. Well, in more Tara sort of Tara Sampradaya, they would explain it as she is although she's the two, she's the sort of like she's the force of creation,
Mm,
and like the birthing mother of the milk ocean, right? So it makes
that's right.
sense in a way that she is the star goddess. Like Tara also means star. Tara is
Yeah.
probably the root for the word tantra, tantara. So I mean, you can make that argument. I'm not saying there's different etymological ways to break it up, but I personally like that because I think that makes sense. Her story is that she goes through the Dakini process. She's a goddess who is like a normie goddess, like just a deva in heaven, but she goes through the carnal ground states, all these states of consciousness. You can describe it as the 10 Mahavijja states, the sort of like the Leela, as you said. She goes through each Leela, each play, and it's Tara. But she's also Kali, especially in the Indian sort of understanding. She's both, but she's
Hmm.
perhaps taking personality as Tara. And so if you go to the Tarapeeth temple, the very famous Smashana, Maha Smashana, because they've cremated over 800 bodies,
Right.
probably tens of millions, but uh, that's the number, that the magic number at least, that you need to become a Maha Smashana. So I think it makes sense. I think that Indians um, don't necessarily recognize like that she came from Tibet, but if you understand the story, I'm not saying she's originated in Tibet, but even the story of Tarapeeth itself is that famous Upasaka goes to Tibet, has to sort of pass these mountain ogresses, these kind of sort of wrathful forms of like the goddess or Devi or Sri Palden Lama or whoever you want to call it, Kali, and he has to go and retrieve the Tara sadhanas from this monastery in Tibet where her third eye fell. So I just
Mm,
think that there is a kind of there's a primordial connection, like whether you want to say that that's
yeah.
Kali or that's Tara. I mean, they're both the same, but they're not the same. And I think that that's exactly what you were saying. It's like it's subtle. It's a very subtle distinction. It's
Yeah.
like that distinction without a difference almost.
Yeah. I love what you said about Tantara as well. I hadn't thought of that. That's a very interesting connection. Just how her name may be related with Tantra itself. That's fascinating.
Well, as I told you, Gregory, I'm a Buddhist, so I always
Yeah.
will
Yeah.
redirect towards like Buddha Dharma, but I'm open. I'm very open-minded in terms of Yogini Tantras and sort of how they're understood and being flexible in that. So
Beautiful.
I have two actually last questions. So the Mahasmashana. So I meant to ask this when I was I guess I was rambling, but did you spend any time in the Smashana when you were in Nepal? Do you think, obviously, we live on the Smashana all the time, because if we're
Right.
saying the world is non-dual, it's both the carnal ground and the garden at the same time. But the specific Smashanas obviously are considered to have extremely, they're places of very dense power, especially for Shakti. So I wondered if you
Yeah.
had any experiences on them or in them or around them, or just even seeing them, I think is very powerful in and of itself.
It is absolutely. Yeah. In Nepal, I hung out at the Ghats, on the Bagmati River. So at the main temple there, Pashupatinath. Um, I spent days there actually, just sitting, meditating, um, watching the cremations going on, and it was just this continuous churn of bodies, and the flames and the smoke just filling the whole city really, but especially there on the the river edge. Um, so I would sit there in meditation doing my sadhana, And yeah, it was incredible. I mean, that really affected me on a profound level. And that was before I went up into the mountains. So, I wonder about that as well, how much that may have played into some of the yogini experiences that I had up in the mountains. But yeah, that and that provided a lot of foundation for later work as far as the the idea of experiencing the cremation grounds just in your life in a daily process, right? Of it, the funeral pyre being lit in your heart, and the goddess dancing there continuously, through your experience and through all of these processes. I mean, be it bodily digestive processes or thinking or interacting with other people or what have you, and just yeah, it ended up being pretty foundational to a lot of other stuff. I was just going to say, I haven't been to like Tarapith or any of these other ones, um, but that's certainly something I would be interested in doing at some point, just to have that experience. But at the same time, it's sort of the thing where unless you're doing a specific sadhana, it's not necessary to continuously repeat the experience. I mean, it depends on sort of what you're going for, I guess. But in my case, it was to have that sort of foundational experience of the cremation grounds and sort of bring into practical life the fact that, well, yeah, this this is it, right? This is the cremation ground, and this is where we are living out this experience, and sort of the temporality of experience, I guess. It really drove it home. So I wasn't going after a particular siddha, for example, or a magical practice where I need to do my sadhana for an extended period of time at the different smashans. But that's definitely a very interesting practice as well that some people do.
Can I jump in with a final question of mine before we get to yours, Jin? Is that cool?
Absolutely. Go for it.
Yeah. So as the I have to ask the basic question as the resident black magician, allegedly. In your sort of recapitulation of Crowley's system, I say that really inclusively. What is a black brother?
Well, so the Black Brother is one who has attempted, or one way or another gotten to the point where they have experienced the void, the emptiness, the deep impermanence of experience, right, of reality itself. And that experience so terrifies some aspect of their consciousness that rather than allowing their ego, their personality to dissolve, or to be flooded through with this sort of divine energy, they cling to their personality, they cling to their self-identity. The kleshas, which you thought maybe were purified, come rushing back in full force, and all of these different obscurations and obstructions come back. The ego becomes inflamed, and the Black Brother essentially does not complete that final passage, or to sort of rework the terms, the Black Brother does not allow that experience to permeate the ego, to permeate the personality. They don't have full individuation. Instead, they get a glimpse of the shadow content and they shove it back down, saying, no, that's not happening. But at a very, very high level of awareness, right? You're like almost there, but you hold back giving every last drop of blood to the goddess. So the passage of the abyss, you know, to use the more kind of Western terminology, it fails, and whatever's left of this shattered ego sort of reformulates itself, comes back together, and that's kind of their journey. It's sort of, I mean, Crowley would say it's over at that point, right? There's no fixing it for quite some time.
Yeah, that's I guess what I'm so interested in, right? Because like even fairly recently I was listening to some kind of talk, it doesn't matter, from Glenn Mullen, right? And he was
Hmm.
describing the process in his words of the wobbles. And it's something that resonated with me on a really, really strong existential level. When you reach certain points in your practice, and then you are sort of thrown into maybe a mini crisis of struggling to then sort of integrate this experience of, however you want to say, the infinite, or this sort of super personal, this thing, whatever just happened, whatever labels and words we want to put on that, with
Sure.
then kind of returning to the normal dualistic, like, you know, our day to day, right? We're not done, but we just had
Yeah.
this like holy shit, right? But for him, and again, I found this really kind of touching and resonant with me, was like, okay, so this is again one of, like, this is where you rely on a teacher that much more strongly, and you sort of stay grounded, and you sort of smooth out those speed wobbles in your practice. But it's very much like for
Hmm.
most people like a transitional phase, right? And I was thinking in, you know, reference to our upcoming now present conversation with you, and it sounded a lot to me like what the Black Brother goes through or
Hmm.
experiences it, but as in Crowley's description and in the Western sort of presentation of these things, it's framed as being so permanent. You know, as we would say on the internet, it's over. It's never been so over, right? Once
That's
you
right.
make this like decisive choice, right, to not go all the way, and it's that clash of like temporality permanence, you know, and all that stuff that yeah, that's kind of what motivated the question, I guess.
That's excellent. I love the wobble concept. I might have to borrow that. That's really good. Um, but yeah, in the Western systems, it tends to follow this sort of heroic path, right? Of like, oh, okay, this is the journey. I'm climbing up this mountain, and if I fail, you know, that's it for the next million incarnations or something, or you know, what have you. And which I'm sure goes back to, you know, the Western sort of foundational roots. I mean, you know, Platonic or Neoplatonic sources would probably have that sort of idea. I might get slaughtered for that though, because I'm not sure offhand, but I think yeah, in the West, and Crowley in particular, he really approached these things as like, okay, I am the solitary hero battling the universe, right? I mean, at one point he said, we'll storm the gates of heaven by will alone, or something along those lines. I'm paraphrasing, but you know, this idea of personal effort, of will, and the individual versus the all, which is an interesting way to look at it. And you know, I certainly did when I was starting out. Um, but I think as you progress in this work, if you're doing, you know, if you're completing all your your different aspects of the material, then you you do start to see it differently. And this idea of like, you know, the hero's journey transforms into something much deeper and wider, I would say. And again, it's very mysterious, isn't it? The whole process. But I I don't know. In my work, I try to embrace that mystery. And I guess I've rambled on about that already, but you know, just this idea that I don't think we have all the answers, and I don't think any of these groups necessarily do yet. I think that if we're really striving for Gnosis, direct awareness, then that is sort of the gold that we're working towards, right?
That was great. You didn't ramble at all. I promise, Gregory. Solar's used to me going on my tantric meandering, so it's really not, is in no comparison. So thank you so much. And I just want to end on one question, and then I'll let you plug. It's a Kabbalah question. It's from your book, New Aeon Tantra, and I loved how you sort of mapped out the middle. I guess it would be a middle nadi, the middle channel, as Kether, Tiferet, Yesod, and then Malkuth. But then, of course, you could include Daath as in and out, and then that would perfectly mirror the 5-channel system that we use in the higher tantras. So I found that very interesting, and just wondered, did you come up with that? Did you borrow that in, or were you thinking of like the 5 channels, or you can tell me what like how you derive that, because I find that very interesting in a Kabbalistic and tantric way.
Yeah, I mean, it was certainly related to the 5 channels and that type of working, but I don't think it was original to me. I mean, I think if you go through some of these other Western systems, you'll see that was also incorporated. But yeah, it gets a little blurry, like which came from where. But no, in that particular instance, I think so. If you look at like what is their name? They had these books. Yeah, The Magical Philosophy, Deng and Phillips. I think they wrote about it a lot more extensively, and came up with this system, and and also incorporated things like the idea of the 4 worlds, along the middle axis of the tree of life, and this idea. So yeah, it definitely resonates with me, and it's a system that I've worked with, but yeah, it's not unique to me.
But it is a middle path system, so I think that it is interesting that you included it, simply because a lot of what you talk about is Indian Tantra, which isn't necessarily a middle. Well, it's not always. I mean, can be. It depends on, like, if you're more into Sri Vidya, you might be walking more of a Sattvic, or maybe even a middle path, sort of like a synthesis between the two. But I do think it's really interesting, because it's a very fundamental kind of Buddhist idea to walk the middle pillar, or walk the middle path. So I appreciate that.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you even see this idea in, alchemical writings, and I think it comes up fairly often in a lot of the Western systems, just the idea that, you shouldn't waver too much on either side, severity or, mercy, but this idea of the middle path kind of resonates throughout a lot of the work.
Well, that seems like a great place to end it. Solar, do you have any additional questions here? It's open. Go for it.
No, I'm good, man. But I really enjoyed this. Thank you so much for coming on.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. I'm sorry for the lateness and the crazy traffic.
No, it's okay.
I'm sure
you're worth it, Gregory. It's totally fine. I've been waiting for this for a year. I've always enjoyed your work greatly, and
you guys are sweet. Thank you.
And it's I'm not saying I'm at your level. I'm not, but I think that we're talking about parallel things. Solar and I often discuss like aeonic thinking, sort of like aeonic shifts. And you and I DM'd a little bit about it, like sort of like my Aeon of the Daughter sort of framework, which obviously goes along with everything that you're talking about, and in the New Aeon Tantra, but it's not necessarily one-to-one, but there are degrees of similarity, which is, of course, why I really wanted you on. And so thank you so much from both of us. We appreciate it greatly. Thank you.
Thank you. I really enjoyed talking to both of you. This was a lot of fun. So yeah. Thank you.
Well, please come back anytime. You're more than welcome anytime. I'm sure both of us would love to have you. And also, please plug your socials, Gregory, and your books. And I'll include links to both of those things in the show notes, as I always do.
Oh, great. Thank you. Yeah. I am terrible at social media, and my publisher doesn't do a lot of it. So it's kind of left to the individual authors. But I do have a website, gregorypetersauthor.com, that links out to at least the two books that are in print. And then I'm still on Twitter. I guess it's X now, gpeters418. And Instagram, Ophidian Vibrations. I post there every now and then. I think that's the main stuff, yeah. And if anyone does web design, hit me up, because my web page looks like it was written in like the late 80s or 90s and needs some help.
At a certain point, that vibe ages well than like trying to keep pace. You know what I mean? I just want to put it out there, man. I appreciated your splash page.
That's awesome. Thanks.
Thank you so much again, Gregory. And again, you really are welcome on anytime. And you ever want to discuss Yoginis, maybe they won't give us such a hard time next time. I don't know, maybe.
Yeah, exactly.
And
maybe they want more attention.
Oh, maybe that's what it's saying. I did do sadhana today, so they should have been a little happy.